I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Welcome to yet another episode of Ask Amanda Anything, where you can ask me anything. Truly, just send in a message via amandaknox.com, and of course, subscribe, because we give deference to our subscribers and their questions.
Through substack.amandaknox.com. Or is it amandaknox.substack.com? That's what it is.
One of the two.
As always, I am Chris Robinson, Amanda's partner in all things, and I will poke, prod, and playfully challenge Amanda to draw out her best answers.
And we'll see how that works out for him.
I know. I've set myself up for marital strife. For your enjoyment.
For everyone else's enjoyment. Yeah. So here we go.
Okay, so first question has to do with the new Hulu series, The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox, which premiered on August 20th. And
has it already been a week? It's already been a week. Episode 3 is out today.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. What the question was?
The question is, what sort of responses are you getting to the new Hulu series, and how does it feel?
Great question. I've been avoiding the comments on all social media, so I'm sorry if I haven't been seeing your very nice comments, mostly because I'm very practiced and aware that whenever something big comes out about me, it typically incentivizes a lot of haters to spew a lot of hate at me. So I'm just sort of rising above that and not viewing that. Instead, I'm getting a lot of feedback from people in my life, be they acquaintances or family or friends. And I think one of the things that I've found really validating, actually, is it is true that seeing something, like being in the room for an experience, even if it is simply dramatized, is a whole different kind of way of empathizing with what happened to me. I've absolutely had many people in my life reach out to me and say, wow, I knew about your interrogation. You've told me the story a million times, and yet none of that prepared me for the overwhelm of emotion that I felt watching it happen. And that's just the power of dramatization. That's the power of this kind of medium. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm really I feel like, especially in my journey to try to describe what it is like to go through an interrogation, I've been met with a lot of resistance by people who don't want to put themselves in my shoes. And I think the show really, if you're watching the show, you can't help but find yourself in my shoes. And it's been validating. I find it really great for that reason. Another fun sort of response that I've gotten from friends of mine who I met in the aftermath of all of this, so people who did not know me while I was going through this, it's been really interesting to see them process the fact that I went through like they know that I went through this. Like it's not a hidden thing. It's not a surprise for any of these people who have since become friends of mine. But like, there's just something really jarring about realizing like, oh, my friend Amanda is also Amanda Knox, the girl who went through this thing. And so I'm watching my friends like come to terms in a visceral way, in a whole new way with my past, which is also really nice because while on the one hand, I love that my friends know me and have experienced me in the way that I am today, I wouldn't be the person I am today without that bad thing that happened that doesn't go away for me. Like that's still a very like visceral reality for me, even as I go about my life on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, it's been a tool of connection, and I've really enjoyed the connecting feeling that I felt with people who are responding to watching the show.
Yeah, I mean that. I think it was my brother was like feeling overwhelmed with rage,
Yeah.
against the cops and the people that targeted you, and I think a lot of people in your life who came into your life after all of this have never really had to deal with the rage side of it. I, at the beginning, famously didn't Google you and I bookmarked that part of your life to get to know you as you were, how you wanted to present yourself and what you were interested in then, not the big totemic weight of this case. But then I had my own period of going down the rabbit hole and feeling that rage. And I still feel that rage in certain moments when you continue to be wrongly vilified.
You read the comments is the
I read the
problem.
comments. I know. I mean, even
You haven't
things,
learned your
yeah.
lesson yet.
Like I was reading the comments on, I think it was on Monica's podcast, your appearance on Monica's podcast, Reclaiming. And someone was like, but how come she hasn't apologized to Patrick Lumumba? And just like, it just infuriates me. And I'm like, well, watch episode 2. You'll understand, one, that she didn't do anything to Patrick Lumumba. The police did. She is not the author of that, the outcome of
And
that
2,
interrogation.
I have
And
apologized to
2,
Patrick
yeah.
Lumumba
And it's like,
multiple
well, but
times.
he says you didn't. And it's like, yeah, he's lying. And I'm sorry that people lie, but like you're on record having apologized to him multiple times.
There's
In
video
court.
footage.
Yeah.
Like.
So yeah, I feel that rage, and I feel a little validated that other people are feeling that rage. I feel less alone in my rage a little bit. But another response I've noticed is, and I think this is actually a really good sign, is I don't think I've seen anybody, it's sort of a lack of a response. I don't think I've seen anybody look at this and go, I think maybe she did it still. Like that question seems to be just out of contention, which is great. And the fact that you're an innocent girl being targeted going through this is done, that's conveyed so well, that's just beyond question. And so if people find fault in it, they're finding other sorts of faults, but they're not looking at this and going, I wonder, we're getting a one-sided story, which, in the wake of the Netflix documentary, which I also thought did a very good job of showing how this miscarriage of justice happened, there were quite a few people that I saw in comments, coming out of that documentary and saying, I just watched this documentary and I don't know, the look in her eyes, I still think she did it. And those people are maybe lost causes, and logic doesn't work on them. But for what it's worth, I'm not seeing that kind of response here. And I think that's a testament to how well the show is really conveying how the investigators, while having good intentions, can be led down this path of error and can be convinced of something that is false. So in a sort of activism way, that's one of my great hopes for the show, that it's really bringing to life for people how an actual wrongful conviction happens. And I'm curious from you, Amanda, if you see this maybe even as a tool for activism. Like, would you even like ask people who are inviting you to speak somewhere to like watch the interrogation scene? Like, would you go talk to some police and show this interrogation scene?
You know that I do. I just wrote a whole Substack essay about this, that yes, like part of this show is to get right something that has been depicted in a really wrong way. And the interrogation scene is part of that. Another part of it is, I think, when you see wrongful convictions depicted in film, a lot of times what ends up happening is they insert, like, to the storyline, a corrupt cop that didn't actually exist because they want to have, like, someone to blame for the bad action instead of depicting a system at fault or just like general, human error. That's a very difficult thing to depict. And I think people have imagined that that's very unsatisfactory to an audience. And I push back and say, actually, I think that's a very interesting villain for a story is these like general, broad human error and systemic failure that can be a source of drama and tension. It's just you have to know how to depict it. And so I think we've done a really good job of that. And I think of it not just as a good storytelling technique, but as what I hope will be a fruit for conversation and potentially exploration of change. So yes. Yeah.
All right.
Next question.
Next question. Sort of related here. This comes from Twitter. Do you think about what happened every day, or are there some days where life happens and it feels normal? I have no idea how I deal with it and not constantly think about everything.
Well, that last comment there is interesting because it sounds to me like you're imagining that I might be dwelling on it, which is I'm not dwelling on it every day. I'm not, thinking wistfully, oh, if only my life had been different kind of thing. But I did have a conversation recently with a friend of mine who, again, was like doing the thing of like, oh my God, you're not just Amanda, this person I know, you're also this Amanda Knox person that I've heard about. And I was like, I was prepping to potentially discuss in debate class in high school, like that kind of thing is there. And it's like, how present is that past for you as you are navigating your life today? And it's like, well, it's very present in the sense that like everything that I have today, I might not have, like in that sense of it, like in the same way that like someone who's had a near death experience might wake up every morning and go, I could be dead today. Like that is a little bit the way that I experience it. And when I find myself encountering the inevitable little challenges of day-to-day life, I'm reminded that I'm really lucky to have those challenges and not other challenges, which were way harder and way worse. So in that way, I do think about it every day. Obviously, I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I've been working on this Hulu series about it. And it's been my job to think about it every day for the last 4 years. But I think just generally, I think about it because it's a filter through which I experience reality to this day. Like I look at my daughter and wonder if the world is going to be kinder to her than it was to me. Like I just think about that. But it's not in a dwelling kind of way. It's just in if you're a person who got a PhD in psychology, I think you kind of sort of always have a little radar on for little examples of psychology. Or if you're a person who's an electrical engineer and you're going to just notice that a light is flickering, you just have that little radar in a way that other people might not be as sensitive to.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, being next to you every day, that there are plenty of days when we're playing with the kids or we, go out to dinner or, we saw Naked Gun the other day, like there's plenty of moments and plenty of days that go by where this is not top of mind and we're living our lives and doing other things. And Italy and the past and all that trauma is not there. But since your book and this series, the last 6 months have been...
you say that, but how do you know what I'm thinking? Like, you don't know what I'm thinking. Like, you don't know what I'm thinking while I'm watching Naked Gun. So
were you thinking about this when we watched Naked Gun?
I'm a little bit always thinking about it. And I can experience it I'm just experiencing it with all of these other
Okay,
things
so
that
yes,
I'm
I mean,
experiencing.
I guess I'm just saying that there's vicissitudes to this, and there's times when it's like very obviously, literally, the thing you're thinking, talking about with people, it's part of your work, etc.
Yeah, I'm not actively thinking about it, but it's certainly passively there in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, in the way that you mentioned, as you know, if you studied electrical engineering or whatever, it's there in that way. Now you happen to be in a phase when it's there in a much more obvious way every day because you're in the midst of this show rolling out. And that's not going to be true forever, you know? And I think there will be periods here next year where, you know, we're working on other projects and it's less present. But we'll see.
I
It's,
mean,
you know,
it's still just my life, you know, like that's
yeah, I
just what my
mean,
life is.
I think also as much as it's been like your entire adult life that you've been on trial in some sense, I mean, you're still on trial right now, appealing your slander verdict to the European Court of Human Rights. But, you know, one thing you pointed out the other day is that, and I think that you mentioned this in your Substack essay, that, you know, we've been working on this show 4 years. That's also the entire lifespan of your world as a mother and the entire lifespan of our daughter, Eureka. And so, you know, you're continuing to build up new experiences, and the pool of your life, the circle of your life continues to expand. And so I'd be curious 10 years from now to ask you this same question and see if your answer is any different. Who knows?
We'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like it all sort of stacks up on each other. So,
Okay, next question. What's the single best piece of advice you might give to someone going through an extremely dark period who cannot see the light at the end?
great question. So, that whole like light at the end of the tunnel idea, it's both true and not true. It's not true in the sense that there's no guarantee that any dark period of your life is going to work itself out the way that you might want it to, right? You might, there might be things that happen to you that can't be undone, right? They can't just be fixed. And in fact, I might argue that even if they do get undone, like in the way that my thing was undone, like I was released from prison, I was legally vindicated in a big way, that doesn't mean that it's undone. It's still a part of you. And so you will be carrying a dark period with you all of your life if you happen to survive the dark thing that you happen to be in the middle of, which there's no guarantee you will.
Right. I mean,
So
when it
in
happened to
that
Meredith,
way,
and
yeah.
she just died, you know?
So there, in that way, the idea that there's a light at the end of the tunnel is a lie. And I can't give you any guarantee in that regard. However, one thing that I have learned is that, and this is truly true, everything that you experience is impermanent. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the bad circumstance the external badness of the circumstance will necessarily change. However, your internal experience of those external forces does not remain constant, which is to say that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The paradox, because no darkness is permanent inside of you, and your ability to do the mental gymnastics that it takes to experience internally in a different way the external thing that is the reality that is imposed on you is 100% within your grasp. And this all goes back to this idea that it's all in the mind. Like suffering and pain. Well, suffering. Pain, no. Pain is like something that you don't really have control over. But suffering, which is the pain, the meta pain, the pain of having pain, is entirely within your control. And it's, it's that paradox where somebody who seemingly has everything going for them in their life can be utterly depressed to the point of killing themselves, and another person who has every obstacle in their way in their life and, grief upon trauma can somehow smile and be grateful for what they have. Like, that's all in the mind. And so I think my biggest piece of advice to someone who's going through a dark period is to be curious about how your mind has the ability to perceive this external reality in myriad different ways, and like feel all the feelings. Allow yourself to feel all the feelings, and you might be surprised by how some of them are not bad. That would be my advice.
You think there's a tendency people have to close themselves off to feeling when they're in a space like that?
Yeah, and to dwell and indulge on certain feelings while ignoring others. And I think that in the midst of pain that you cannot resolve on your own, the best course of action is to be curious about what is happening in your mind in the moment that you are experiencing the inevitable pain.
And that's true not just for a dark period, but for any day of your life, right?
Yeah, I think that that's good advice for any day of your life, but especially when you are experiencing inevitable
You're
pain.
getting at like what you might call stoic framing, and something you said in your book, Free, that really struck me was relaying what Don Saulo, the prison chaplain, told you about how, when you pray to God for strength, he doesn't give you strength, he gives you the opportunity to be strong. And that's just a mental shift to say, like, okay, this life I'm in sucks right now, but also what an incredible opportunity for personal growth, like I've never had before, right? And are you lying to yourself when you say something like that?
No, it's not. It's not a lie. It feels like that's not the initial thing that I would say to someone who is experiencing pain. Like you have to work your way up to that. I think that my initial piece of advice is not going to be, hey, but it's gonna, like what an awesome example of personal growth. Instead, my piece of advice would be curious about what is happening in here right now, because it's more than you think. And I think that you are going to discover that you are yourself are more than you think you are. And this experience is going to draw that out of you if you pay attention. So pay attention. And then I think once you do pay attention, then you inevitably discover those truths. And that you're not alone.
Next question, last question, but a meaty one here. This comes from Jesse, who asks amazing questions. Thanks, Jesse. On the heels of the Coldplay couple incident, there's been a lot of talk about the culture of surveillance that we're now all subjected to. As someone who's been surveilled and had private information exposed to the masses, what are your thoughts on the current state of things? And how should we handle our fears of one day being humiliated on the internet?
Yeah, I don't have great news about that because because here I am, 18 years after the fact, still chipping away at the at this like boulder that was dropped on me. Or like, I think the way that my showrunner described it, she was like, Amanda, like a volcano went off and buried Amanda in all of this ash. And she's just been cleaning up other people's mess for her entire adult life. Is just cleaning up other people's mess just so that she can be seen as a human being again. And that's true. Just here I am chipping away at the old mess that everyone made. And I can't say that I'm, clear of it. I will say that there is so one part of this question is surveillance, right? Can you have a private moment of illicit affair or making a mistake, which is what we all should be allowed to do without suffering, reputational damage for the rest of our lives, defined by one mistake. This is a dilemma, even with this has been a dilemma with the criminal justice system as well, where it's like, okay, how many of us have broken the law in our lives? Well, kind of every one of us has broken the law at some point, but how many of us are being, targeted or profiled, and how many of us are actually facing consequences and being made examples of? And I think that's the fear. It's the fear is that you're going to make a mistake and be made an example of, instead of be allowed to make a mistake just like everyone else and then move on with your life.
Well, and it's just forever on the internet, right? I think that's the big piece of it, is that it now can be shared virally to millions of people in an instant. That wasn't true, 15 years ago.
Right. And each one is less, now that the internet is so saturated, each moment lasts not as long. However, for the person who experienced it, it does last forever, because now we Google everyone before we, decide to hire them or be friends with them or date them. And so if you're the person who gets caught on the Coldplay cam, you are not only resigning from your job and getting a divorce, but now in your future, anytime you try to rebuild your life, someone's going to Google you and you're going to have to answer for having been caught in your own mistake or undoing that became very that came into the public awareness, and therefore has a kind of baggage to it. You are scarlet lettered, and that's a legitimate fear, I think, because we live in a culture that really is interested in making an example out of people. This is actually an idea that Chris and I are exploring right now with a show concept that we're developing, where the idea is that at some point someone is always on trial, and it doesn't really matter who it is. It could just be a person chosen at completely random, because everyone is guilty of something, and so we can find fault in everyone at any point and set them up as an example that we then punish collectively as a kind of, I don't know, as a means of justifying our own sense of morality and why do we have this impulse when at any point it could be us, right? And I think it's because we forget that at any point it could be us. There are millions of people in the world that it could be. And then when it falls upon us, we're completely shocked. That said, I think a lot of people are anxious that it could be them. And we do our best to protect ourselves and surveil ourselves only in the most positive light, and surround ourselves with people who are surveilled in only the most positive light. I think that the thing that I would potentially present to people is, one, I think we should be more intentional with the way that we use judgment as entertainment, and we mix those two things up. And we don't just hop on the bandwagon every time someone has a bad moment in a public way, and don't use it as an example always for a conversation about human failing, because that's what that person ultimately becomes defined by.
I want to throw a couple wrenches into this.
Well, hold on. I'm not finished with my thing. You don't know. And the other thing I was going to say is that, but then also remember that, like, there's a silver lining to all of this, which is that on the other side of a really embarrassing moment, you find out who your friends are, and people do come, right? Like, people who know you and care about you will appear. It's people that, and it'll surprise you who they are, because you might think that somebody who would have your back and then they disappear. And then there are other people who you never thought would have your back, and they are your most steadfast, supporters. I think that that's a really interesting experience to discover who are your fair weather friends, who are your foul weather friends, and who are just your friends. They're different.
That reminds me of a friend of ours who went through a cancellation at some point told us recently that several years afterwards, some people who abandoned them in the midst of this cancellation started trickling back into their life and didn't really acknowledge how they had totally disappeared and not stood up for their friend, right? And their reaction was to just let them come and not hold them to the fire to be accountable for that, which I think is an interesting choice. The wrench, yeah.
I mean, I think not everyone knows how to handle that situation gracefully. And you have to, just as you would hope that someone else would give you grace in your moment of being ungraceful, I think it helps to also give people grace to not know how to react to that situation. Like, that's also an embarrassing moment for them. And the fact that they're coming back to you later is an interesting message.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nonverbal form of communication of
I'm ready to accept any and all forms of communication, including nonverbal
that brings me to
concession.
My wrenches, which is a couple aphorisms or axioms, if you like. There's various versions of this quote. One of them is, never write when you can speak, never speak when you can nod, never nod when you can blink. And this is a kind of like,
never blink when you can pass out.
Yeah, like in the halls of politics, the idea that, and I've been in situations with people where they insist on a phone call, and the vibe I get is they don't want to be on record in an email saying the thing they're about to say to me. And sometimes it's a very smart move, right? So that's I want to get your take on how that sort of mode of behavior plays into this question of the fear of being humiliated on the internet. And the other wrench is this, a different mantra, but related: don't do anything in private that you wouldn't do in public, as a sort of moral code. How do you feel about that? Because,
I
part
don't
of
like
me
that.
for the Coldplay thing, for instance, like, if the thing you're objecting to is that people caught you in an infidelity, like, maybe you shouldn't have been having an infidelity.
No, I don't think
right?
the Coldplay people at all are suggesting that they are mad about being caught in their moment of infidelity. I think what they're feeling is embarrassed about being so fucking stupid. But
but
I
if
think
they had followed
the bigger
that axiom,
the bigger question though is, like, how much are we being surveilled, and are we even aware of what we're consenting to, right? Like, when they decided in their affair to go to a Coldplay concert, were they aware that they might have a camera pointed at them while they're, there? I think that it's interesting that like you can't really like a baseball game, for instance, like just going to a baseball game means that you might have a camera pointed at you, and there's no way to like opt out of that, right? Like, so now the cost of participating in a public event is that you are giving like you're giving away the right to be surveilled. And I think that's a more interesting dilemma. Like, is that the world that we want to live in, where just by virtue of existing in a public space or participating in a public event, even if you are not the object of that public event, you might become the object of that public event because of our ability to surveil people? Does that discourage people from wanting to participate in public events? And I think it does. Like, I just think it does. I know that for years, I did not go out in public, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want my mere presence at a karaoke bar to become a public event. And
to become a
it
focal
was
point for other people's
extremely,
experience.
and it was extremely isolating. And I don't like the idea, like, I don't love that axiom of don't do in private what you wouldn't want to do in public, because private situations are different than public situations. In a private situation, you are with either just yourself or with people who are like, in the best case scenario, consenting to a scenario that might not be of the taste of the broader public. Not everyone agrees on what is a thing to do. And so, like, the idea that just by existing, you should be willing to be judged by everyone, I think that that's utterly debilitating, and it doesn't allow people to explore the various forms of being and doing things that might not be to the taste of someone else. Like, there's a reason why, like, kink communities have like codes of conduct when you enter into those spaces. The understanding is that everyone here is a consenting adult, but not everyone outside of here is going to think kindly on us for our thing that we're doing that is consensual. And so I don't know. Like, I think that we should be thinking very much about the cost of, and like just the feeling of like debilitation and how it motivates people to suppress exploration if there's the fear of broad public judgment and retribution.
Yeah. I mean, like, that fear is there even if you're doing something benign, right? I mean, the way that viral video clips get, taken without context, and you see someone's behavior that in full context might make total sense, but when given a snippet, it makes somebody look like an asshole. Or even if it
doesn't make total sense to you. Like, just because it doesn't make total sense to you doesn't mean that it's not a completely harmless and legitimate way to be experiencing reality. Like, that's my point, is like, not everyone agrees on what is appropriate behavior in every circumstance. And so
I just want to push back a little bit, because I think there's a personal ethical side to this, which is also like, yes, the line of don't do in private what you wouldn't do in public makes no sense if you're talking about like having sex with your spouse. Like, yeah, obviously I'm going to do that in private and not in public, and it's very different, right? But when it comes to, say, talking about someone, bad-mouthing someone behind their back, right? That's a thing, that's a gossip. It's the kind of thing that most people have engaged in at one point or another. And if you apply that maxim to that situation, well, on the just purely pragmatic side, you're not going to end up, in the embarrassing situation of having said something bad about somebody and that news becoming public, right? But more importantly, it's not a healthy behavior for you, just for your own lived experience, to be bad-mouthing somebody behind their back. I kind of feel like I would rather live a life where I'm not doing that. And so for me, that maxim actually leads to not only a better ethical feeling, but just a healthier outlook on my day-to-day life.
Sure, and that's related to the never lie thing, right? Like, and that's an extension of that. Like, you can live in a world, like, you can rest at ease in the world if you 100% are Jack Sparrow and never lie. Like, you're just telling the truth, and you never have to worry about, like, some, remembering a thing that you said differently, like even just the small minor lies, like I'm not going to the wedding because I got the stomach flu instead of whatever. Like, there's a million little lies that we say on a day-to-day that we think are fine, but that can add up and that we can be held accounted for when you don't need to lie, right? Like, you could just be honest. And the same thing is with your actions. Like, you can just do a thing that if you were held accountable to the people who are impacted by it, then you would act otherwise. But I think that that's a very different thing than, like, that's the difference between, are you doing something in private that could be construed as harmful to another human being versus, are you just doing something in private that is your own private business, and you don't want it, like, no one's getting harmed by it, and yet people are still judgmental as fuck. Like, it's a significant line, even if it's sometimes a fine line. And I think that my biggest concern is when you are doing something benign and unharmful, but people are judging you for it anyway. Like in the example of me going and doing karaoke. Like,
Or
I'm not
there's the
hurting anybody
example
by
of
doing karaoke.
that guy who had his arm out the window, and somebody thought he was making the OK sign, and he was just some dude who was...
He was cracking his fingers.
Yeah,
he was doing that. Yeah.
And someone snapped a photo and said, "Look at this white supremacist," and essentially,
and he's like,
Hispanic
I'm a
guy.
Mexican dude.
Yeah.
Like,
So like, you can be doing something absolutely benign and still get ruthlessly judged by the internet machine. So that's always a risk. I think you do reduce your risk if you commit to not lying, if you don't commit infidelity. Like, you shouldn't be doing that anyway, right? So like, you're not going to be publicly exposed for infidelity if you don't do infidelity. I can stand behind that principle.
I think people, and again, like, this is a truism of the criminal justice system. The thing that deters crime is not the harshness of the sentence. It's the assurance of whether or not you're going to get caught. And I think that one sort of positive thing from surveillance culture is it really brings to people's mind the idea that they might get caught for doing a thing that they know is wrong, but they want to do anyway. And so that assurance that you might get caught is a deterrent, and it should be a deterrent. That said, I think that there's this slippery slope where people are being held accountable for stuff that they shouldn't be held accountable for,
Well, and as you said before, in the court of public opinion, there's no rights of the accused. There's no right to face your accuser. There's no proportional sentencing.
And there's no evolution.
Stuff.
There's no evolution of your character. There's no redemption. There is this impulse to keep you statically contained in the mistake that you happened to, arise in, unless you miraculously turn it around. And I mean, I guess I'm an example of miraculously turning it around somehow, but it helps that I didn't actually hurt anybody in the first place. Like, I didn't actually do anything wrong in the first place. So, like.
All right. Well, this has been good. We have to go, though. We have many things to do. Thank you, everyone, for connecting with us. If you want to reach out with questions for the next Ask Amanda Anything, you can go to amandaknox.com or to amandaknox.substack.com. We will prioritize questions from subscribers. Thank you, and see you next time.
I will wax philosophical with you any day.